My HOA president stole my $30,000 patio for her daughter's wedding and called 911 when I caught her. She had no idea about the secret feature I built into it. What happened at that wedding made headlines nationwide. 300 phones recording, news crews live, and one revelation that changed everything. This 47 million view nightmare ends with a twist you won't believe. I was applying the final varnish to the deck, the last thing I built with my dad before cancer took him, when Brenda's voice cut through the air like a rusty saw blade. Liam, your noise is unacceptable. Her eyes locked onto the wood, shifting from anger to greed. I'm taking this for Tiffany's wedding. Try and stop me. This wasn't just any deck. 500 square feet of hand-selected red oak lumber, custom carved railings, and a built-in seating area that could accommodate 50 people. The whole thing had cost me $30,000 and 6 months of weekends, but it was worth every penny and every drop of sweat. Dad had insisted on over-engineering it, saying, "Son, if you're going to build something, build it to last forever." Little did I know how prophetic those words would be. Her manicured fingers scraped the wood grain, the same grain my father had sanded for hours. I watched her expression shift from manufactured outrage to calculating greed in a matter of seconds. Oh my, this is absolutely gorgeous. This must have cost a fortune. She started walking around the perimeter, her designer heels clicking against my driveway as she pulled out her phone and began taking photos from every angle. I was planning to rent something similar for Tiffany's wedding, she said, her voice taking on that fake sweet tone that made my skin crawl. The rental company wants $15,000 for just 2 days. Highway robbery. She crouched down, running her fingers along the wood grain. Plus, I already lost $20,000 to some contractor who took my deposit and disappeared. Wedding planning is just so stressful, you understand. I didn't understand and I didn't care. I just wanted her off my property so I could finish my work in peace. But Brenda had that look in her eye, the same one my elderly neighbor Maria had warned me about when I first moved in. That woman could steal the spots off a leopard and convince you they were always hers, Maria had said. Liam, we're neighbors. Good neighbors help each other out, don't they? Brenda's voice had taken on a harder edge now. I'm just asking to borrow your deck for 3 days. I'll even pay for the moving costs. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting after kneeling for so long. Brenda, this deck is permanently installed. It's not designed to be moved. The foundation posts go 3 feet into the ground, and the whole structure is integrated with my home's architecture. She waved her hand dismissively like I was explaining quantum physics to a child. Oh, I'm sure we can figure something out. After all, I am the HOA president. We have resources for community improvements. The way she emphasized community improvements made my stomach turn. This wasn't a request. It was a threat wrapped in suburban politeness. My neighbor Maria chose that moment to shuffle over, her cane tapping against the sidewalk. She was 68 years old, sharp as a tack, and had lived in the neighborhood for 30 years. Morning, Liam. Beautiful work on that deck. Your father would be proud. She turned to Brenda with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Brenda, dear, still trying to solve your wedding venue problem? You know, the Oakwood HOA had a president who tried to borrow community resources once. She ended up borrowing herself right into a lawsuit. Brenda's face flushed red, but she maintained her plastic smile. Maria, I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about. I'm simply admiring Liam's craftsmanship and exploring options for my daughter's special day. But I caught the way her jaw tightened and her fingers clenched around her phone. As Brenda strutted back toward her house, she paused at the property line and turned back with a smile that would make a shark nervous. You know, Liam, I've been reviewing our HOA regulations, and I'm not entirely sure your deck meets the current height requirements relative to ground level. How long ago did you say you built this? My blood ran cold. 2 years ago. The HOA approved all the plans. Her smile widened. Oh, but I'm a new president now, and we've updated our guidelines. You have 30 days to bring it into compliance, or I'm afraid we'll have to issue a removal order. Unless, of course, We can come to some sort of arrangement." She walked away before I could respond, her heels clicking against the pavement like a countdown timer. This woman's been president for 3 months, and she's already driven two families out of the neighborhood, Maria said quietly. "You better watch yourself, son." I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. The next 5 months were like living in a suburban war zone where the enemy wore pearls and wielded HOA violation notices like weapons of mass destruction. It started small, almost laughably petty. First came the citation for my grass being half an inch above regulation height. I'd measured it myself. It was exactly 2 3/4 inches, well within the 3-inch limit. But according to Brenda's notice, the optimal aesthetic standard was now 2 1/4 inches. $100 fine. Then came the notice about my front door. Apparently, the desert sand beige I'd painted it 2 years ago was not acceptable because it was supposed to be Sahara cream beige. To my eyes, they were identical, but Brenda had attached paint swatches to prove they were drastically different shades that disrupted neighborhood harmony. $200 fine. The most ridiculous was the parking violation for my truck being angled 2 degrees off parallel to the curb. She'd actually come out with a protractor to measure it. $150 fine. That Tuesday, as Springsteen played on my garage radio, the sirens started wailing. I was under the truck, wrench in hand, when I heard them approaching. Two police cars pulled up, and I slid out to see Officer Johnson, a tired-looking man in his 50s who'd clearly seen too much suburban drama, approaching with his hand resting casually on his belt. "Evening, sir. We got a call about suspicious activity. Someone reported a man working on a vehicle at night, possibly building an explosive device." I stood there, covered in motor oil, holding a wrench, completely dumbfounded. I'm changing my oil in my own garage with the door open. Officer Johnson sighed and looked at his partner, who was trying not to laugh. "Would this happen to be related to your HOA president?" he asked, and I could tell this wasn't his first Brenda rodeo. The HOA meeting the following week was like walking into a kangaroo court where the kangaroo had rabies and a law degree from a cereal box. I'd prepared a presentation with photos of every bogus violation, timestamps showing when the notices were issued versus when the supposed violations occurred, and even witness statements from neighbors. I stood at the podium, clicking through my evidence, watching the board members' faces. 3 of them sat like mannequins, eyes glazed over, clearly just waiting for their cue. "As you can see," I said, pointing to a photo of my grass next to a ruler, "these violations are harassment, plain and simple." Brenda didn't even let me finish. Motion to dismiss all complaints against HOA leadership. All in favor. 3 hands shot up so fast I wondered if they were spring-loaded. The other homeowners in attendance shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding eye contact with me like I had some contagious disease. That's when I decided to dig deeper. Maria, bless her soul, still had connections from her 30 years working as a legal secretary. She helped me request copies of all HOA communications through proper channels. What we found was interesting. Brenda had sent an email to the board about relocating non-compliant structures for community use, with an address listed. The address wasn't for any community center or public space. It was her home address. She was literally planning to steal my deck and claim it was for the neighborhood's benefit. But what really caught my attention was the signature line on the emails. 5 board member signatures appeared on every document, but I knew for a fact that 2 of those people had moved out of state months ago. She was forging signatures, a federal offense that could land her in serious trouble. Meanwhile, Brenda was winning the PR war. Her social media posts about protecting our neighborhood from code violators got hundreds of likes from other HOA presidents in the area. She turned me into a pariah without anyone even knowing what I supposedly did wrong. My neighbors started crossing the street when they saw me coming. The teenage kid who used to mow lawns in the neighborhood told me his mom said he couldn't work for troublemakers. Even the mail carrier started leaving my packages at the end of the driveway instead of bringing them to the door. But Maria stood by me, and together we kept documenting everything. She's getting bolder, Maria warned me one evening as we reviewed the latest batch of violations. Last time I saw someone act like this, they ended up stealing half the HOA funds and fleeing to Costa Rica. But Brenda is smarter. She wants your deck, and she's going to make your life hell until you give it to her. The breaking point came on a Monday morning when I found a bright orange final notice taped to my front door. 48-hour removal order. The document claimed my deck was in violation of 7 different codes and needed to be demolished within 2 days, or the HOA would hire contractors to do it and bill me for the work. At the bottom were 5 signatures I didn't recognize. Maria came over as soon as I called her, took one look at the notice, and shook her head. Those signatures are fake. I know because one of them is supposed to be Tom Morrison, and Tom's been dead for 6 months. I stared at the paper, feeling a mix of rage and disbelief. This woman was committing fraud, forgery, and harassment, all for a deck. So, what do I do? I asked. Maria looked me straight in the eye and said, "Honey, if you run now, she wins. And trust me, she won't stop with you. Next week it'll be someone else's pool, then someone's garden. Bullies don't stop until someone stops them." That night, I made my decision. If Brenda wanted a war, she was going to get one. I just had no idea she'd already planned her nuclear option. The 48 hours came and went, and I spent them fortifying my position. I hired a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes, installed security cameras covering every angle of my property, and filed formal complaints with every relevant authority I could think of. My lawyer, a sharp young woman named Jennifer who dealt with nightmare HOAs before, told me I had a solid case. She's violated at least 15 state statutes and federal laws with these forged signatures alone, she said, reviewing my documentation. But these cases can drag on for years. HOA presidents know most people don't have the resources or patience for a long legal battle. I assured her I had both. What I didn't have was any idea that Brenda would skip the legal battle entirely and go straight to theft. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. Every Saturday morning for 2 years, I'd gone to the farmer's market at 7:30, spending exactly 2.5 hours browsing vegetables and chatting with vendors. I'm a creature of habit, and Brenda had been watching long enough to know my routine. That particular Saturday started like any other. I loaded my reusable bags into my truck, checked that my security cameras were recording, and headed out. The farmer's market was bustling with the usual crowd of health conscious suburbanites and elderly couples looking for the perfect tomato. I spent time at my favorite vendor's stall, picking out sweet corn and debating the merits of different pepper varieties with Missy Chin, who'd been selling there for 20 years. I even bought an extra bag of peaches, planning to make my father's famous cobbler recipe. It was 9:45 when I pulled back into my driveway, and for a moment my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. Where my beautiful deck had stood for 2 years, where I'd spent countless evenings watching sunsets and remembering my father, there was nothing but exposed concrete footings and scattered wood chips. My $30,000 deck, all 500 square feet of it, had vanished like a magic trick gone wrong. My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone and pulled up the security camera app. The footage made my blood boil and my heart sink simultaneously. At 8 o'clock sharp, less than 30 minutes after I had left, a moving truck from Glenn's Movers had pulled up. 6 men had emerged with professional efficiency, armed with power tools and dollies. But what really got me was Brenda standing there in her designer workout clothes, directing the operation like a conductor with an orchestra. The camera caught her pointing at different sections, miming where cuts should be made, even handing out cash tips to the workers. At 8:45, she walked directly up to one of my cameras, smiled, and waved. She knew she was being recorded, and she didn't care. By 9:30, my deck was in pieces on 3 flatbed trucks headed to its new home. The audio wasn't clear, but I could make out her saying something about community improvement project to one of the workers. I drove straight to Brenda's house, my lawyer on speakerphone telling me to stay calm and not do anything stupid. I parked on the public street, careful not to set foot on her property, and there it was. My deck, or at least parts of it, being reassembled in her backyard like some kind of perverted jigsaw puzzle. Watching them dismantle Dad's final project felt like losing him all over again. I could see workers measuring and drilling, and right in the center was Brenda, supervising with a glass of what looked like mimosa in her hand. She saw me through her back gate, and our eyes met. The smile that spread across her face was pure malice mixed with triumph. I stood there on the public sidewalk, taking photos with my phone, when Brenda suddenly clutched her chest and staggered backward. Help, she screamed, loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. Home invasion. He's attacking me. She pulled out her phone with the speed of a gunslinger, and I could hear her screaming into it. 911. There's a man trying to break into my house. He's violent. Send help now. The next part happened so fast it felt like a blur. Brenda ran to her front door, flung it open, and started live streaming on social media. Pray for me, this is happening right now. My neighbor is stalking me. He's trying to break in because I caught him violating HOA rules. She was crying real tears, her voice shaking with what seemed like genuine terror. If I hadn't been watching her smile at me seconds before, I might have believed it myself. The workers in her backyard had stopped what they were doing, looking confused and concerned. Some of them pulled out their phones to record. Within minutes, I heard sirens again. This time, 3 patrol cars showed up, and I recognized Officer Johnson getting out of the lead vehicle with a look of exhausted resignation on his face. Ma'am, he said to Brenda, who was now hyperventilating on her front porch, can you please calm down and tell me what happened? She pointed at me with a shaking finger. He's been standing there watching me. He's obsessed. I have a restraining order. She didn't, of course, but she said it with such conviction that one of the younger officers actually put his hand on his weapon. Officer Johnson looked at me, then at Brenda, then at the obvious construction happening in her backyard. He walked over to where I was standing, still on the public sidewalk, and spoke quietly. Sir, what's your version of events? I showed him the security footage on my phone. His eyebrows went up as he watched Brenda directing the theft of my deck. This is interesting, he said. Then he noticed something I'd missed. A receipt that had fallen out of one of the workers' trucks. He picked it up and read it. Glenn's movers? Wait, isn't Glenn Murphy Brenda's brother? The look on Brenda's face when she realized what he'd found was priceless, but she recovered quickly. That's not relevant. This man is harassing me. Officer Johnson sighed and addressed both of us. This is a civil matter. Theft of property worth over $10,000 is a felony, but I need a formal complaint and investigation. Sir, he said to me, I suggest you contact your lawyer. Ma'am, he turned to Brenda, I've responded to 47 calls from you this year. If you call 911 again for a non-emergency, you will be charged with misuse of emergency services. That night in my garage, I sat surrounded by boxes of old projects, feeling defeated. My deck was gone, torn apart and reassembled in the yard of a woman who'd terrorized an entire neighborhood. But in the wreckage of my garage, I found my father's last lesson. A dusty box labeled Riverside Park Project 2019, canceled. Inside were blueprints, technical manuals, and most importantly, a small remote control. Suddenly memories came flooding back. 5 years ago, I'd won a contract to build an innovative playground feature for the city. A rotating platform that could convert from a stage to a play area. The deck was designed with a hydraulic system that could flip it 180 degrees, revealing different surfaces for different uses. The project was canceled due to budget cuts, but I had already built the prototype. I'd used that same design for my home deck, thinking the mechanism might come in handy for parties or events. I'd completely forgotten about it until now. I picked up the remote, its weight familiar in my hand. The batteries were dead. I had replacements. As I inserted fresh batteries, I wondered if the system still worked. Only one way to find out. Always build a backdoor. I pressed the test button and held my breath. From the direction of Brenda's house, carried on the night wind, came the faint but unmistakable sound of hydraulic motors humming to life. Friday night arrived with all the pomp and circumstance of a royal wedding, if royalty lived in suburban Texas and had criminally questionable taste in event planning. Brenda had transformed her backyard into what she probably thought was a fairy tale wonderland, but looked more like a discount Vegas wedding chapel exploded. White fabric draped from every surface, twinkling lights strangled innocent trees, and right in the center, like a stolen crown jewel, sat my deck. She'd added white carpeting and golden railings, trying to disguise its origins, but I knew every grain of that wood, every carefully placed screw. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for 6 o'clock, and by 5:30, expensive cars were lining our street like a luxury dealership. I watched from my window as people in designer clothes stepped carefully across Brenda's lawn, champagne flutes already in hand. The local social elite had turned out in force, including the mayor's wife, several city council members, and what looked like half the country club. My position was perfect. After discovering the remote still worked, I'd spent the week testing its range and reliability. The hydraulic system I'd installed was a marvel of overengineering, designed to support 500 people and operate in any weather condition. The deck could complete a full 180-degree rotation in 45 seconds, powered by near silent motors hidden in the support structure. I'd originally programmed multiple surface options into the system, but for tonight, I only needed one. The underside of the deck, which had been sealed and weather treated but never decorated, bore a special edition I'd made 3 nights ago. Using weather resistant industrial paint and the brightest red I could find, I'd written a message that would be impossible to ignore. The letters were 3 feet tall, professionally stenciled, and devastatingly clear. But timing would be everything. Too early and security might hustle people away before the full impact. Too late and the moment would be lost. By 7 o'clock, the party was in full swing. I could hear Brenda's voice carrying across the yard, shrill with excitement and probably several glasses of champagne. Through my binoculars, I watched her holding court on my deck, gesturing dramatically as she regaled guests with what were undoubtedly lies about her vision for the space. Tiffany, the bride-to-be, stood nearby in a white sundress, looking uncomfortable but trying to smile. Her fiancé, Chad, a bland-looking man in his 30s who came from old money, kept checking his phone like he'd rather be anywhere else. The tension was palpable even from my living room. Chad's mother, a severe-looking woman in pearls who probably had her own wing at the country club, kept examining the deck with suspicious eyes. I saw her run her hand along the railing and whisper something to her husband, who frowned in response. They knew something was off, but couldn't quite place what. The speeches started at 8:30, right on schedule. The wedding coordinator, a harried-looking woman with a clipboard permanently attached to her hand, managed to corral everyone into position. Chad's best man went first, delivering a generic speech about love and friendship that sounded like he'd copied it from the internet. Then Chad himself took the microphone, and that's when things got interesting. I want to thank my future mother-in-law, Brenda, for this beautiful venue, he said, pausing awkwardly. This floor is very solid and level. The crowd laughed politely, but I could see confusion on several faces. Who gives the toast about how level a floor is? Chad continued, stammering through his speech, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. His mother's face was a mask of barely contained disdain. Anyway, Chad concluded, here's to Tiffany and to solid foundations. The metaphor was so bad, several people actually winced. Then Brenda took the microphone, and I knew my moment was approaching. She launched into what can only be described as a 20-minute manifesto about motherhood, sacrifice, and her vision for community beautification. She actually used the phrase, transform our neighborhood one project at a time, while standing on my stolen deck. The audacity was breathtaking. People told me I couldn't pull off the perfect wedding for my daughter, she said, fake tears glistening in her eyes. They said I was too ambitious, too demanding. But a mother will do anything for her child. I personally designed and oversaw every inch of this beautiful space. That was it. That was my cue. Brenda raised her champagne flute. A mother does anything for her child. The deck shuddered. Glasses slipped from hands. Then the wood groaned, and Tiffany's perfect wedding tilted into hell. I pressed the activation button on the remote. For a second, nothing happened. Then came the low hum of hydraulic motors spinning to life, a sound I had heard 1,000 times during testing, but never with this much anticipation. The deck vibrated slightly at first, just enough to make people look down at their feet in confusion. Champagne sloshed in glasses. Someone asked if it was an earthquake. Then the real movement began. The entire deck began to tilt, slowly but inexorably. Screams erupted as guests realized something was catastrophically wrong. Women in heels stumbled, grabbing for anything stable. Men dropped their drinks, expensive scotch splashing across white clothing. Brenda stood frozen at the center, microphone still in hand, her face a mask of horror as she felt her stolen stage betraying her. Earthquake, someone yelled, but this was no natural disaster. This was karma with a hydraulic assist. The deck continued its rotation, now at 30 degrees and climbing. People scrambled for the edges, some jumping off onto the grass, others clinging to the railings like passengers on a sinking ship. The wedding coordinator was screaming into her phone, probably trying to call someone, anyone, who could stop this. At 45 degrees, gravity took over. The carefully arranged furniture slid like an avalanche. The champagne tower collapsed in a crystal explosion. The wedding cake, a 5-tier monstrosity that probably cost more than some people's cars, toppled sideways, covering 3 city council members in fondant and buttercream. But the real showstopper came when the deck hit 90 degrees and continued rotating. The underside was revealed in all its glory, my message blazing red against the sealed wood. Stolen property check, social media, Brenda the Thief built by Liam 2019. The silence that followed was deafening. 300 eyes stared at the giant accusation, then turned to Brenda, who stood in the wreckage of her party looking like she'd seen a ghost. Chad's mother was the first to speak, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Brenda, explain. Now, but Brenda was already running toward the house, pulling out her phone. Even from my position, I could hear her screaming, 911, terrorists. ISIS is attacking my daughter's wedding. Help! The aftermath was swift and brutal. Guests fled like rats from a sinking ship, some still covered in cake, others limping from twisted ankles. The mayor's wife was helped to her car by her driver, loudly declaring she'd never attend another event at this criminal's house. Chad's parents stormed off without a word, dragging their shell-shocked son with them. Tiffany stood in the middle of the chaos, tears streaming down her face, looking at her mother with a mixture of betrayal and dawning comprehension. Mom, she said, her voice small and broken, what did you do? The deck completed its rotation and locked into position, my message now facing the sky like a billboard of truth. In the distance, sirens wailed. Officer Johnson was about to have a very long night. But the best part? When I checked my security cameras, I had footage of everything, including Brenda's confession about personally overseeing every inch of her stolen goods. My lawyer was going to have a field day. Saturday morning dawned with the kind of crystal clarity that makes you think the universe has a sense of irony. The sun was shining, birds were singing, and Brenda Thompson was about to commit the biggest mistake of her life. By 3 a.m., she'd managed to orchestrate the complete removal of my deck from her property. I watched the whole thing on my cameras. A convoy of trucks arriving in the dead of night, workers dismantling everything with practiced efficiency, even a street sweeper to remove any evidence from the road. By dawn, it was like the deck had never been there at all. Her backyard showed no signs of the previous night's disaster beyond some crushed grass and a suspicious champagne stain shaped like Texas. But Brenda wasn't just covering her tracks. She was doubling down. By 8 a.m., she'd hired an emergency event company to erect a temporary wedding platform in Riverside Gardens, the public park where the ceremony was scheduled. $5,000 for a last-minute rental that looked like it might collapse if someone sneezed too hard. Her damage control campaign was swift and ruthless. Social media posts appeared with the hashtag Team Brenda, painting her as the victim of a jealous neighbor's terrorist attack. She actually used the word terrorist to describe a rotating deck. The post went viral in all the wrong ways, with 2,000 shares from other HOA presidents and suburban warriors who saw themselves in her struggle. Local mother perseveres against sick individual who tried to ruin her daughter's special day, read one particularly dramatic post. Comments poured in supporting her, calling for my arrest, suggesting I should be run out of town. Some entrepreneurial soul even started selling justice for Brenda t-shirts, though I doubt they sold many. The court of public opinion was firmly in her corner, at least among the demographic that considers a slightly tall fence a crime against humanity. Meanwhile, she was also playing legal hardball. Her lawyers sent cease and desist letters to anyone who shared videos from the rehearsal dinner, threatening lawsuits for defamation. The 911 calls had reached a new level of absurdity. At 10 a.m., she called claiming I was using telepathic weapons to control her mind. Officer Johnson later told me he could hear dispatch openly laughing in the background. Ma'am, he'd said with the patience of a saint, please only call if there's a real emergency. Telepathy is not a police matter. But Brenda wasn't deterred. She transformed from a garden variety HOA tyrant into something more dangerous, a cornered narcissist with nothing left to lose. Around 11, she began her door-to-door campaign, visiting every house on our street with a mixture of threats and bribes. I need all camera footage from the last 2 weeks, she demanded, clutching a folder of official-looking HOA documents. Failure to comply will result in a $500 fine for obstruction of a community safety investigation. Most neighbors, terrified of her wrath and lacking my resources to fight back, handed over their footage on USB drives. That's when Maria played her crucial role. My elderly neighbor had been watching Brenda's rampage with the calculated patience of someone who'd survived worse bullies. When Brenda knocked on her door, Maria transformed into an Oscar-worthy performance of a terrified old woman. Her hands shook as she fumbled with the USB drive, nearly dropping it twice. I recorded everything, she stammered, eyes downcast. 2 weeks of footage, but please, I don't want any trouble. I'm on a fixed income. I can't afford fines. She held out the USB like it contained nuclear codes, and I watched from my window as Brenda's eyes lit up with predatory glee. Finally, someone sensible, Brenda said, snatching the drive. This will be very helpful in the criminal case against Mr. Mitchell. Maria's performance was so convincing that even I almost believed she was scared, and I knew the truth. The truth was that Maria and I had spent 3 hours the previous night carefully editing that footage. We'd included plenty of mundane neighborhood activity, some shots of me coming and going, nothing that would seem suspicious. But buried in the middle, like a landmine waiting to explode, was the complete, unedited footage of Brenda's theft, captured from multiple angles by Maria's extensive security system. We'd even enhanced the audio, making sure every word of Brenda's directions to the movers was crystal clear. The timestamp was visible in every frame, proving beyond doubt when the theft occurred. But the masterstroke was making sure it looked like routine security footage. Nothing special, just another file among hundreds. Brenda was so drunk on her own power, so certain of her victory, that she didn't even preview the file. Instead, she went straight home and started live streaming again, holding the USB up like a trophy. I have the evidence, she crowed to her phone camera. My lawyer will destroy him in court. This USB contains proof of Liam Mitchell's campaign of harassment. The live stream had 500 viewers and climbing. Comments flooded in supporting her, calling me everything from a psychopath to a domestic terrorist. She waved the USB around, practically dancing with joy. Sending to my lawyer right now. Justice will be served. I watched her connect the drive to her laptop and attach the file to an email. In her haste and arrogance, she didn't even open it. Just attached the whole thing and hit send with a flourish. Done. My lawyer will have this criminal behind bars by Monday. Tiffany appeared in the background of the stream, still in her pajamas, looking haggard. Mom, shouldn't you check what's on there first? But Brenda waved her off. No time. The wedding is in 4 hours. I know what's on there. 2 weeks of his stalking behavior. What Brenda didn't know was that her lawyer's assistant Jennifer was the same Jennifer who'd helped me understand HOA law. The same Jennifer for whom I'd built custom office furniture 2 years ago when she was starting her practice. The same Jennifer who had, completely of her own accord and definitely not at my suggestion, set up an interesting email configuration. Any video evidence received by the senior partners would automatically be forwarded to a preset distribution list for case review purposes. That list just happened to include every wedding guest's email address, which we'd obtained from the wedding coordinator's conveniently public planning website. At exactly 5:17 p.m., during the wedding ceremony, 300 phones would receive an email with the subject line Urgent Evidence from Brenda Thompson versus Leah Mitchell. The attachment would be impossible to ignore, and the sender would appear to be the law firm itself. It was technically not hacking, just creative use of automated systems and publicly available information. By 2 p.m., I was sitting in my living room watching Netflix and eating popcorn like it was any other Saturday. Maria came over, still nervous about our plan. What if they check the video before the wedding? She asked. What if the email doesn't send? I showed her my phone, where I could see the email sitting in the law firm's outbox, scheduled and ready. They won't check. Brenda's too arrogant and too busy. Her lawyer's at his son's baseball game according to social media. Jennifer confirmed he won't look at it until Monday. By then, it'll be too late. At 3 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Mr. Mitchell? This is Channel 7 News. We received an anonymous tip that something significant will happen at the Thompson-Whitfield wedding at 5:17 p.m. Care to comment. I kept my voice neutral. No comment, but you might want to have cameras at Riverside Gardens. Just a suggestion. I hung up before they could ask more questions. Maria looked at me with wide eyes. You called the news? I shook my head. I didn't, but I have a feeling Brenda's made enough enemies that someone wants to see her fall. The question is, how many people are waiting for this moment? The wedding of Tiffany Thompson and Chadwick Whitfield III was set to be the social event of the season, which in suburban Texas meant it had all the elegance of a rodeo crossed with a real estate seminar. Riverside Gardens had been transformed into what Brenda probably imagined was Versailles, but looked more like a wedding-themed yard sale. The temporary platform wobbled ominously every time someone walked across it, held together by what appeared to be prayer and industrial-strength zip ties. 3 news crews had set up on the periphery, ostensibly covering a beautiful local wedding, but clearly hoping for something more explosive. The guest list read like a who's who of suburban Dallas society. 300 people who collectively controlled most of the area's HOAs, country clubs, and mid-level political positions. They arrived in waves of luxury SUVs and German sedans, the men in identical navy suits, the women competing for who could wear the most inappropriate hat. The atmosphere was tense, like everyone was waiting for a storm, but pretending to enjoy the sunshine. Brenda stood at the entrance like a general surveying her troops, dressed in a mother-of-the-bride outfit that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. She was live streaming again, because apparently she'd learned nothing from the previous night's disaster. Welcome to my daughter's perfect day, she gushed to her phone. Despite the terrorist attack last night, love conquers all. She'd actually started referring to the deck incident as her 9/11, which showed either a stunning lack of perspective or a complete break with reality. Tiffany emerged from the bridal tent looking genuinely beautiful, though her smile seemed forced and her eyes kept darting around like she expected another catastrophe. Chad stood at the altar looking like he'd rather be getting a root canal, while his parents sat in the front row with expressions that could curdle milk. His mother had apparently told several people she was only there to minimize the embarrassment to the family name. The wedding coordinator was mainlining antacids and checking her phone every 30 seconds. The ceremony began at exactly 5 o'clock because Brenda had threatened to sue the officiant if he was even 1 minute late. The elderly pastor looked like he'd been dragged there against his will, which he probably had.
He began with the standard, dearly beloved spiel, his voice barely audible over the sound of 300 people trying not to gossip about last night's fiasco. Brenda sat in the front row, phone still out, live streaming every moment. "My baby is getting married," she whisper-screamed to her audience. "Nothing can ruin this moment." The universe, as it turns out, has a sense of humor about these things. At exactly 5:15, just as the pastor was getting to the good part about love being patient and kind, the first phone buzzed, then another, then another. Within seconds, the garden sounded like the world's largest beehive had suddenly awakened. 300 phones receiving the same email notification at the same moment created a symphony of digital interruption. At first, people tried to ignore it. This was a wedding after all, and most folks had at least some manners. But curiosity is a powerful force, especially when everyone's phone is going off simultaneously.
I watched from the live stream as the first brave soul, a woman in the third row, discreetly checked her phone. Her eyes widened. She nudged her husband, showing him the screen. He almost dropped the device. Like dominoes falling, guests began pulling off phones, their expressions shifting from mild annoyance to shock to something approaching glee. Urgent evidence from Brenda Thompson versus Liam Mitchell read the subject line. The attachment was labeled simply security footage. 2-week period. One by one, people began opening the video. The wedding coordinator noticed the commotion first. She rushed over to Brenda, whispering urgently, but Brenda waved her off. She was too focused on live streaming to notice that her audience was now watching something far more interesting. The video began playing on 300 screens simultaneously. The first few seconds showed routine neighborhood footage, but then came the money shot. 8 a.m. Saturday morning. Crystal clear HD footage of Glenn's movers pulling up to my house. There was Brenda in her designer workout gear, directing the operation like a felony foreman. The audio was perfect. Every word captured. Quickly now, he's at the farmer's market until 10. Brenda's voice rang out from hundreds of tiny speakers. The footage showed her handing cash to the workers, even helpfully holding pieces of my deck as they loaded them. "Be careful with my new deck," she said clearly, sealing her fate with her own words. The timestamp was visible in every frame, proving this was recent footage, not some old recording. The video continued, showing multiple angles, multiple cameras, absolutely irrefutable evidence of grand theft. But the coup de grace was the final shot. Brenda looking directly at one of my cameras, smiling and waving, clearly aware she was being recorded and simply not caring. The pastor, bless his heart, tried to continue with the ceremony. "Do you, Tiffany?" But Tiffany wasn't listening. She'd seen the video playing on the phone of a guest in the front row. Her face went through a journey of emotions: confusion, recognition, horror, and finally rage. "Mom," she said, her voice starting quiet but building to a crescendo. "Mom, what is this? What is?" She grabbed the phone from the guest, staring at the screen where her mother was directing the theft of my deck. "You said you bought it. You said it was a donation. You lied to me." Brenda finally noticed something was wrong. She turned from her live stream to see 300 people staring at her, most holding phones showing her criminal activity in high definition. The color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug. "That's fake," she screeched. "Deep fake. AI. Russian hackers." But even her most loyal supporters could see this was real footage. Chad's mother stood up with the bearing of a queen at an execution. "You're a thief," she said, her voice carrying across the stunned crowd. "You stole that man's property and tried to use it for your daughter's wedding. The Whitfield family does not associate with criminals." She turned to her son. "Chadwick, we're leaving." "No." But Chad, showing more spine than he displayed in his entire bland life, was staring at Tiffany. "Did you know?" he asked quietly. Tiffany shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Mom told me she bought it, that it was a surprise." She turned back to her mother with fury in her eyes. "You let me plan my wedding on stolen property. You made me an accomplice to your crime." The news crews, smelling blood in the water, had pushed closer. Cameras captured every moment as Brenda's world collapsed. "This is a setup," she screamed, pulling out her phone. 911. Russian hackers. Cyber terrorism. The Chinese are attacking my wedding. Officer Johnson arrived with two other units, probably breaking speed limits to get there. He stepped out of his car with the expression of a man who'd reached the end of his patience. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice deadly calm, "you're under arrest for theft of property exceeding $10,000. Brenda's live stream was still running, broadcasting her meltdown to an audience that had grown to thousands. "I'm being persecuted," she wailed as the handcuffs clicked on. "I just wanted a perfect wedding for my daughter." She looked around wildly, seeking support, but found only phones recording her downfall. "Liam did this. He's a terrorist. Check his basement for bombs." Even her most ardent supporters were backing away now, deleting their supportive posts, pretending they'd never taken her side. The court of public opinion had rendered its verdict in real time. Tiffany stood in her wedding dress, a vision in white surrounded by chaos. She looked at Chad, who was being pulled away by his parents, then at her mother being led to a police car, then at the crowd of people filming everything. With remarkable composure, she walked to the microphone at the altar. "I want to apologize to everyone here," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "I especially want to apologize to Mr. Mitchell. I didn't know what my mother had done, but that's no excuse. I should have asked questions. I should have stood up to her years ago." She looked directly at one of the news cameras. "Mom, you need help. And Mr. Mitchell, if you're watching, I'm sorry. You deserve justice." She pulled off her veil, dropped it on the ground, and walked away from the altar with more dignity than anyone else had shown that day. The wedding was over before it truly began, but the video was just beginning its viral journey. Within an hour, it had 1 million views. Within 6 hours, 10 million. The hashtag Karen Gets Karma was trending worldwide. Brenda Thompson had become the most famous HOA president in America for all the wrong reasons. 6 months later, I was sitting on my fully restored deck, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of justice. The legal aftermath had been swift and satisfying. Brenda got 2 years probation, $50,000 in restitution, and a lifetime ban from serving on any HOA board. The judge had actually used the phrase shocking abuse of power 3 times during sentencing. She also got 300 hours of community service, which she was serving by cleaning public parks, including Riverside Gardens where her daughter's wedding had imploded. The viral video had reached 47 million views, spawning countless memes, reaction videos, and even a few song remixes. My personal favorite was the auto-tune version of her screaming about Russian hackers. The internet, as they say, remains undefeated. But the real satisfaction came from the positive changes. Our neighborhood held emergency elections and voted in new HOA leadership, with 98% supporting reform. The new bylaws included strict oversight measures and term limits. Democracy had returned to our little suburban fiefdom. Tiffany had surprised everyone by thriving after the disaster. She'd broken things off with Chad, moved out of her mother's house, and started law school with a focus on property rights and HOA reform. She'd even sent me a handwritten apology letter and a check for $5,000 from her own savings. I'd sent the check back with a note encouraging her to use it for law school. She'd make a better lawyer than her mother ever made a president. Maria had become something of a local celebrity, with her dramatic USB handoff becoming the stuff of legend. She'd written a book called The HOA Survival Guide: How to Fight Back Against Suburban Tyrants that was climbing the bestseller lists. At 70, she'd found a new career as a speaker at property rights conferences. Even Officer Johnson had benefited. Getting a promotion after his handling of the case was praised by the department. He told me Brenda still called 911 about once a week from various phones, reporting everything from alien invasions to communist infiltration of the Garden Club. As for me, I'd turned down most interview requests and the Netflix documentary offer. I just wanted my quiet life back, working with wood and honoring my father's memory. The deck had been returned piece by piece, and I'd spent 2 months restoring it to its former glory. I'd even added a small plaque, site of the Great Karen Meltdown of 2024. Tourists actually stopped by to take pictures, which was weird but harmless. I was installing a new water feature when the doorbell rang. Maria was at her book club, so I answered it myself. A woman in her 40s stood there, holding an HOA handbook and wearing the determined expression of someone about to make my life difficult. Mr. Mitchell? I'm Barbara Henderson, your new neighbor. I've noticed your fence exceeds HOA height requirements by exactly 0.25 inches. As the future HOA president, I must insist you address this immediately. I looked at Maria's house, where she was just getting home from her book club. She saw Barbara and raised an eyebrow. I smiled at the new neighbor. Mrs. Henderson, would you like some coffee? We should discuss this properly. As she followed me inside, pontificating about fence regulations and the breakdown of suburban standards, I couldn't help but glance at my garage. In the corner, covered by a tarp, sat a new box labeled Project 2024, Automated Fence Defense System version 2 with sprinkler integration. Some lessons are worth learning twice. The mechanical manual peeking out red instructions that would make any HO a tyrant think twice about manufactured violations. As Barbara Henderson eyed my fence, her HOA manual in hand, I smiled. Last time, I built a secret into my patio. This time, let's just say karma's getting an upgrade. Because sometimes, when karma needs an assistant, it's good to be prepared. Want to hear about Barbara? Because this time, I'm ready for round two.